Good morning and a very warm welcome to this session. I'm sure those of you who've been with us since the morning are enjoying the flow. There's a lot of good conversations that have been happening, and for the next 50 minutes, we will be talking about resilience and pandemic in the informal city. As we will go about unraveling it, we have with us four panelists. I will introduce them to you very soon. But before I start, I just also wanted to, note and share with you that this morning when I got up, the first thing I was reading in the news was that today marks the 36th anniversary of the world's worst industrial disaster, based on many parameters, which was the Bhopal gas tragedy in a bustling urban center, Bhopal in central India, this day in 1984. The event killed over 3,000 people, and there were reports of further casualties in the years to come later, which don't get added to this number. There were about 500,000 people affected, about 100,000 of them badly affected, many of them living for life with disabilities. And I was just again reading this morning that in the last few weeks, about 200 of these survivors who were already struggling have lost their lives to COVID-19. So for these people, it just never ends. It's just cycles of struggle. As we can imagine, it was an industrial disaster. So the worst affected people were those who were the workers and the low-income communities living around this industrial estate. So on that serious note, I think the importance of talking about the informal, which is often largely invisible sector of cities, is really important. We've seen heartbreaking images of people from this segment hit by COVID-19 and the lockdowns that followed from various countries, different parts of the world, and that suffering still continues. While that happens, there have been the usual spate of cyclones, of floods, and other problems that they regularly face. In this context, today we are talking about resilience in the sense that the way we've been working for the past few decades, trying to build and invest in this. There are small victories that we've been celebrating in terms of reducing life loss from various disasters, but what's not often covered in headlines is the increasing economic impact, a lot of which is felt by those at the bottom rungs of the economy in cities. Urban disasters have very rapidly emerged as the most expensive disasters usually. These are the disasters for which we often come out least prepared because for past decades we've earned experiences of more rural settings and mega disasters. And in many ways, the risk in cities is growing, and per se, risk is urbanizing, and growing cities are at increasing risk than ever before. Our work on resilience in the past has grown from just being able to bounce back better to factors of anticipating risk that is in the future, of being able to absorb it as we progress, and learning and adapting constantly. And it is in this learning and adapting piece where this conference and this session sits really well. What has additionally happened, which we will try to cover in this session, is lessons learned this year when the pandemic hit us in our faces and it told us that we are, despite all our efforts and celebrations of little victories, we are completely unprepared for a future that we can't even foresee very well. There are issues which are systemic issues that can't be addressed through small pilots and small initiatives in isolation. There are major issues of being able to scale what we see as solutions so that they can be globally applicable, or at least applicable to constituencies where we are invested and we work. A lot of the people that we want to talk about, the informal sector in cities, are the ones who really fell through the cracks in this pandemic and the lockdowns for the last few months. And what we also partly knew, but has really come out in a very stark way, is that a lot exists at the interface of the formal and the informal sectors that we don't understand, that we don't even fully know about. And one of the things that is emerging increasingly is, as we go around talking about economic recovery, if we look at the poor and if we look at the micro and the nano enterprises that operate in this space, informal and formal interface, we don't even have data. We don't know how many of these are there. We know they're in very large numbers. We know roughly they contribute to 40% of the economies in many of the countries that we come from, but we have no specific data on them. The governments don't have it, the civil society doesn't have it, the academia doesn't have it, and that itself tells us how poorly prepared we are. So today's discussion is going to be around technology that is available and probably very valuable, but are we able to use it well enough? We'll talk about social impact of what really is it that we are trying to chase. And we'll talk a bit about governance and scaling so that all these things, the good stuff that we have around the table, actually can find pathways to being effective and creating this impact that we are mentioning.
Thanks, Anshu. You touched upon a couple of very important points. One is on the short term and the long term benefit of technology to happen. Over the last 10 years, that's something that I have very closely observed and seen its implementation. Whereas data and analytics as a field could be very widely spread in enterprises. Today, what we are seeing is how AI can make a difference to, like the humanitarian good. It's a society, it's our everyday lives. How can we implement it? I think that's what is the need of the hour now. So I'll talk about two specific aspects in terms of the pandemic in hand right now, and if we have to talk about how AI can make a difference in the short-term benefit, right? One thing that they have increasingly adopted is the simple fight around the face mask that's going on, right? It can very well be a super spreader kind of a situation, or it could be a factor that a particular locality, everyone has become very complacent and there is no rules being followed. And you will see that that could be a hotspot where things are spreading around. One of the challenge was that though there was facial recognition as a technology which was there, having a facial recognition with the mask on added a complication onto it today. Then there was another aspect in terms of social distancing. If there is a different way of tracking, it could be in Singapore, they do a QR code you scan and where your ID is being recorded. Currently, there is an RFID devices that are being spread about. There could be multiple ways different countries are adopting on how do we ensure that these communities maintain the rules, what is required to curb this pandemic, right? But it's not going to be an easy job. It's every individual who need to play a role. That's from an immediate reactive measures. Then there are aspects, Anshu, you and your team has been working greatly towards it, is how to reskill, upskill these vulnerable set of crowd which find it very difficult. Where is the next meal coming from? Right now, that's the area that we need to find ways how we can enable them to reskill themselves. There could be a simple upgrade that can happen or a shift in their focus where there are some of the fundamental jobs, could be construction workers, could be some of the voluntary jobs which can be taken up. But identifying these people, what are some of the basics that they need to know? How easy can they go from knowing nothing to knowing something and making a livelihood out of it? That's where the short term to medium term impact is going to make a difference. And thanks to you and your team, Anshu, you're doing a fantastic job around that. Now, if we take a step back, the pandemic is here. We are seeing cyclone effects that's coming in. There are floods that are hitting the cities more often. There are heat waves that are coming in. Australia, San Francisco had a lot of these forest fires coming in. Take a step back, and if we look at the long-term impact, all of these are, if we talk about disaster management, it's a post-facto impact or involvement of technology. How do we prevent this? How do we evaluate what are some of these drivers which is causing these things? That's where we are seeing increased adoption of AI and technology. So one of the activity that we've been working with the city of Calgary in Canada is that understanding the urban heat islands for a particular city. What does that mean? In each locality, which is the area which is very hot as compared to the rest of the urban cities, how is that contributing? If there has to be a new building which is coming up in that area, how can it bring down the average of the heat index there? So this has been helping them in planning their city better. Similarly, Anshu, with your team, we have been working on the disaster recovery management, or even can we predict the impact of floods on the day-to-day level? So there are buildings there. What is the risk score that we can give for a particular building in case there is an event of a flood? What should be an evacuation plan? What should be an alternate approach to reduce the consequences due to this natural disasters? That's where AI has been helping in creating a long-term impact. While it helps us in scaling a lot of effect, going back to the point that you talked about, Anshu, in the social sector, especially in areas like this, there is a lot of aspects to be unearthed which help us in understanding how well can it be utilized. Along with that comes the other side of the problem, that the data that we are collecting, how ethically it's getting used. So has to be a right balance and ensure that whatever it is, whatever the applications that we are trying to adopt these technologies, is being done for long-term impact, and also we are being ethically responsible in doing the way we are doing, and all the parties are equally invested in making it a successful program. That's how I see it grow, Anshu.